Trump, Putin, and secret hopes in Moscow. What do Russians really think about America's most controversial president? Some see him as a savior, others as a traitor, but the truth behind Russia's complex feelings about Trump might shock you. I'm Elvira Berry, a writer born in the USSR, and on this channel I discuss Russian history and culture without sugarcoating anything. Today, we'll dive deep into the minds of several distinct social groups in modern Russia, exploring their thoughts, hopes, and fears surrounding the leader of the new US administration. The Russian political elite greeted Trump's election with joy and great expectations. They even started referring to him as Donald Fredovich, using his patronymic as a sign of respect. But why is this? To understand this, we need to look at what Russian elites have been living with. For the past 100 years, the relationship between Russia's political elite and the United States has been complex, a kind of love-hate dynamic. On the one hand, national pride constantly pushes Russians to compete with America, even if only in their imaginations. They want to be cooler than America, to win competitions, or at least cheer for their own when they manage to best the United States. On the other hand, despite all the patriotism, many of those in power would be more than happy to move to the US or at least send their capital and children there. The reason for this is simple. No one in Russia has a guaranteed place in society and no one is safe from arrest or having their property seized. For example, right now, there's an active campaign to seize businesses that were privatized over 30 years ago, after the collapse of the USSR. If the highest officials decide they want your business, nothing in the world can stop them. For most of Russia's elite, it's not about leaving the country permanently. These people are very ambitious and proud, and the life of a retiree does not appeal to most of them. But what would they be in America? Even if you are incredibly rich and influential in Russia, it doesn't mean you can run a successful business in America or anywhere else, because often the foundation of your wealth involves government contracts, useful connections, or outright bribes. But if you move your children and assets abroad, it signals to your superiors that you are disloyal, and they may seize your source of income. In the best case, they'll take it away. In the worst, you can end up in jail. Thank goodness we live in more peaceful times. Nowadays, you won't be shot for treason. People go into power to make money, to gain access to resources they can redirect into their own pockets. This is the essence of the regime. Everyone is doing it. The scheme has always been simple and clear. We make money with scheme between Russia and send as much as we can abroad. But with the start of the war in Ukraine, Russia's elite found themselves in an almost unsolvable dilemma. On one hand, they wanted to continue enriching themselves and moving their gains to a safer place. But on the other hand, the big boss Vladimir Putin began demanding loyalty and subjected many of his associates to sanctions. And that was not the deal they had made. Yes, many of Putin's associates profited from the war, especially those running army production and military supply chains. But there is no guarantee that all their wealth will stay with them, or that their heirs will inherit it. Putin is not young, and everyone understands that the most he can remain in power is another 15 years. And then what? All big property rights depend entirely on Putin's favor. When a new regime comes in, they can declare everything you own illegal, accuse you of being a thief or a corrupt official, and take everything away. The only logical solution is to quickly move at least some of your assets abroad. But how do you do that with sanctions hanging over you? While Joe Biden was in power, the situation seemed hopeless. But with Trump's victory, everything changed. Trump doesn't focus on what's morally right or wrong. He acts based on what benefits him and America as he sees it. And he believes that it's perfectly fine to reconcile with Putin and lift sanctions from his circle if Putin is willing to negotiate end the war and offer American companies favorable contracts. This is an opportunity for the Russian elite. All past sins will be forgotten. Payments will be restored. Air traffic between the US and Russia will resume, and life will return to normal. Inside Russia, everyone suffers from the war, except for the most radical nationalists, and everyone wants it to end. But no one can push Putin toward peace because for him that would mean disgrace and the loss of everything. In reality, there's only two people in the world capable of forcing Putin to peace, Trump and Xi Jinping. Trump can help Ukraine, and Xi controls much of Russia's imports. But Xi won't act because the war benefits him. So all hope rests on Trump. That's why his election was met with great enthusiasm and hope within Russia's elite. All of the above is very much disliked by the nationalists and supporters of the war with Ukraine to a victorious end. Although this group makes up only a small percentage of the population, they are currently in favor. Nationalists consider Americans to be their number one enemy and do not believe in the possibility of negotiations with them. While many in the US claim that Trump sold himself to Putin, among Russian nationalists, there are rumors that Putin is planning to sell Russia to the Americans. First, they see any potential peace with Ukraine as a defeat. Despite all efforts, they have not been able to destroy the Ukrainian state. They believe that a ceasefire would mean Ukraine using the break to build up its military strength and, in a few years, attempt to regain the occupied territories. Since Trump insists on peace, they view him not as a friend of Russia, but as someone trying to destroy it through others. Secondly, nationalists are deeply unsettled by the thought that Americans could take over Russia's natural resources trade. This is one of their main fears. You might think, why should they care? After all, they don't own anything and have no real control. It seems like they are worried about Putin's oligarchs, afraid that the country's natural wealth could pass from their hands into those of American oligarchs. The situation is quite ironic. For about 10 years, Russian propaganda scared nationalists with the idea that if Russia didn't strengthen its military power, the foreigners, especially the Americans, would take Russia's natural resources. And now, here comes Trump. And it seems like the president of Russia is the one willing to hand it all over. So, what was the war fought for all these years? Almost the entire Russian opposition deeply hates Trump, mainly because he is willing to communicate with Putin and turn a blind eye to his crimes. It should be noted that for a long time, the Russian opposition had an overly idealistic view of America. It was seen as a model of democracy and a global standard of moral values. Yes, it had its flaws, but the general opinion was that America stood on the side of good and Putin was on the side of evil. The opposition expected America to help the Ukrainians defeat Putin, which would in turn create the conditions for an elite revolt and the downfall of Russia's authoritarian regime. Now, this camp is full of despair because it's obvious that Trump doesn't care about what kind of regime exists in Russia or whether Ukraine remains independent. He wants peace in Europe and ideally new agreements with Putin regarding the use of Russia's natural resources. Things were made worse when Trump cut the funding for US aid programs through which opposition media had received money for decades. Many journalists were left without work, and naturally, they are extremely dissatisfied and passionately denounce Trump on social media. On the one hand, this is a serious blow to freedom of speech. Opposition journalists cannot get hired by Russian state media or media that support the official narrative, and there are no other options left in Russia. As a result, they have to look for other work. But if they work elsewhere, they won't have the physical capacity to focus on political writing. It's worth noting that there are many independent Russian language channels and websites that earn through crowdfunding or subscriptions. But these outlets are struggling too because YouTube doesn't monetize traffic from Russia, and websites critical of the government are constantly being blocked within Russia. On the other hand, the support from America for this media hasn't yielded results if we consider the desired outcome to be a change in the regime or an increase in anti Putin sentiments. In short, the Russian opposition is deeply disappointed with Trump, predicting a financial catastrophe for America and the rise of fascism. Their hopes are now tied to the belief that a recession in the US will lead to a global recession, which will reduce oil prices and ultimately bury Putin's regime. It's also interesting to know that within the Russian opposition, there's a trend to analyze Trump's psychological profile. This gives some explanation as to why he suddenly reversed his policy toward Russia. The general conclusion is that Trump is a trickster and a narcissist with an inflated ego who wants to be the greatest president in US history. But in this camp, no one believes in his success. Russian entrepreneurs who have built their businesses independently and aren't relying on the success of Putin's political system are cautious about Trump but are generally more favorable toward him. They see Trump's many loud and sometimes frightening statements as invitations to negotiate, aiming to reshape international trade and security agreements in a way that benefits everyone, but primarily America. In their view, peace is better than war. First, the shooting should stop, and only then should we figure out what to do next. In business circles, it's believed that the US has overvalued its currency on global markets, which has destroyed its industrial base and made America dependent on other countries for key supplies. As a result, there is a push to devalue the currency and bring manufacturing back to the US, an issue of security and self sufficiency. Additionally, they believe tariffs should be used to equalize the cost of American imported goods, enabling American entrepreneurs to better compete for consumers. From a business perspective, it's good that Trump understands this. But the downside is that his approach can be clumsy and creates conflicts out of nowhere. What business people are concerned about is this: tariffs on China will lead to third countries purchasing goods from China, relabeling them, and selling them to the US at lower tariffs, essentially passing them off as domestic products. While China loses and American consumers lose, intermediary countries and the US budget benefit from receiving the tariffs, although not at China's rates. However, these third countries will also impose their own tariffs on US goods, so it's not guaranteed that the balance will shift in America's favor. Additionally, price increases in the US could lead to reduced consumer spending, potentially triggering a recession. Everyone understands that we are witnessing a real-time experiment and its outcome is uncertain. But overall, the mood in business circles can be described as cautious optimism. Ordinary people in Russia know very little about real life in the US. Despite endless news stories, constant discussions of America, and the fact that people watch American movies and listen to music, they are still largely in the dark. A lot of things are simply incomprehensible because life in Russia is structured differently. Local governance, healthcare, pension savings, and much more. Recently, Russian state TV was all about how Americans are Russia's main enemies and all the evil in the world either comes from or is approved by them. But now, all media outlets are providing neutral comments. No aggression, no sarcasm, nothing like before. It feels strange. Clearly, there was an order from above to behave properly to avoid spoiling the improving relations. How can the audience process this? Just a while ago, everything was completely different. But one must understand that television in Russia isn't about providing information. It's about figuring out what the authorities want and what should be said to stay safe. What's really happening in America? Who cares? For an average Russian, it's as distant and inaccessible as Mars. Many Russian immigrants in the US adhere to conservative values, and for them, Trump is the beloved and awaited president. I think this comes from the overlay of values brought from Russia onto American realities. Many Russian speaking Americans believe that Trump will protect them from crime, social disorder, high prices, and taxes. Their ideas about happiness look like this: want lower rent? Deport the illegals. Want higher wages? Deport the illegals. Want your taxes to go toward your healthcare? Deport the illegals. Many Russian speaking immigrants are also strongly against DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, and are annoyed by its spread in education and entertainment, particularly in movies. Additionally, many Russian speaking immigrants support Trump because they are Jewish and appreciate his strong support of Israel and his stance against those who advocate for Palestinians. In general, the idea of less government interference in business and private life is appealing to Russians who have left a country where the government meddles in everything. But it's still unclear. Are tariffs and the actual destruction of all trade relations a form of non-interference in private businesses? Or the opposite? If this video provided value for you, please consider subscribing. It truly helps the channel grow. If you'd like to support my work directly, you can click the join button, give a super thanks, or buy me a coffee using the link below. Every bit of support means a lot to me. I'm grateful to have you here.